Tens of thousands of Israeli troops have gathered on the border with Gaza as their defence minister told them they'll soon see the territory from the inside. And he called for the total annihilation of Hamas. That's as Rishi Sunak's trip to the Middle East continues, with the Prime Minister travelling to Egypt from Saudi Arabia today. It's also hoped that the first deliveries of humanitarian aid to Palestinian civilians inside Gaza could be delivered through the Rafah crossing from Egypt as soon as possible. Well, joining me right now is a retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, former commander of the US Army in Europe. Good afternoon to you, Ben.
Hello, Julia.
I really appreciate you joining us. We normally are talking, of course, about what's going on in Ukraine, and I would like to touch on that before the end of our conversation, if we can. In terms of what is happening in the Middle East, can we just talk, first of all, about what we had with the Israeli Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant. He met with troops on the Israel-Gaza border. We've, of course, seen the recall of hundreds of thousands of reservists to the Israeli Defence Forces, and their training is ongoing. We've seen weaponry arrive, tanks and the like. He said to them, whoever sees Gaza from afar will soon see it from the inside. The command will come, I promise you. There is no forgiveness for this thing, only total annihilation of Hamas organisation, terror infrastructures, everything that has to do with terrorists and whoever sent them. If it will take a month, a week, it will take a month, it will take 2 months until we annihilate them. Does that tally with what Joe Biden, the US president, had to say as he left the region the other day, saying, don't be consumed by anger as we were after 9/11? Does that bode badly, do you think?
Well, I think, of course, the Israelis will be very clear in understanding what my president said and what I imagine your prime minister said, that certainly they have our support to destroy Hamas, which needs to be destroyed, but that doesn't mean wanton destruction of civilian infrastructure or striking targets where there's a high risk of civilian casualties. So I tell you, it's going to be very difficult for the Israeli soldiers. They're going into a very, very dangerous situation. They're under enormous pressure not to cause harm to civilians, but yet they're on a mission, as you just described, to destroy an enemy of Israel.
Indeed. Now, the thing is, we're in a situation where we've got an awful lot of diplomatic developments going on behind the scenes. There's probably a lot more going on behind the scenes than we're hearing in public. You've been at the heart of some of the very senior military command structure in the United States. What will be going on in terms of these meetings? What Joe Biden meetings he has, Antony Blinken, your Secretary of State, but also our Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, Rishi Sunak travelling. He's been in Israel, he's been in Saudi Arabia with the Crown Prince there, and now on his way to Egypt. What will be going on? What will they be trying to do in terms of calming things down?
I think number one priority is going to be trying to limit this conflict from expanding, to make sure that Iran and others outside of Gaza are deterred or stopped from doing things that could cause the conflict to grow larger. I think that'll be the number one priority for the diplomatic effort. And then, of course, finding a way to get humanitarian aid into Gaza. I mean, Hamas has not been a very helpful partner in this process. So I think there's going to be more and more pressure to try and get that done and to find ways to help the Palestinians that live in Gaza that are trying to get out, to help them get out of there. But I also think, I imagine myself, if I was a captain or a colonel in the Israeli Defense Forces, I'm going to have an army lawyer on one shoulder. I'm going to have media over the other shoulder, grading my paper every step of the way. But this is the nature of where we are now.
Yeah, indeed. And we know there's obviously a lot of emphasis on trying to get aid to people in Gaza, the innocent civilians who've been forced from their homes, evacuated, were told to evacuate by the Israeli forces. And there is a big concern there. And a lot of that will be Western concern, not just genuine humanitarian concern for those innocent men, women and children, but also the PR of this, that actually they've got to be seen to not giving basically a free hand to Israel, saying, yeah, we understand this was a horrific massacre. We understand your right of self-defence, your right of self-defence, including the destruction of Hamas, a terrorist group who undoubtedly the world would be better off, including the Palestinian people of Gaza, would be better off without. But you can't have free reign if it does involve the mass deaths of civilians, and particularly the civilian population, where, let's face it, half of them are under the age of 18.
Yeah, look at what happened with this attack on this hospital. I think there's been a lot of compelling evidence that comes out and says this was not an IDF strike on that hospital. But it took about 5 seconds for the whole world to rush to the assumption that Israel had done this. And that derailed efforts by President Biden and others to help bring about diplomatic solutions. And of course, that's the last thing that Hamas wants. That's the last thing that Iran wants, is a diplomatic solution. So this is part of the tide against which all of us are going to be swimming to try and bring about a solution that is diplomatic, but still enables Israel to destroy the threat of Hamas.
How likely do you think it is that we will end up with a wider Middle East war of some sort, that Hezbollah via Iran or Iran themselves, Revolutionary Guard, getting involved? Is it your view that actually most of the other states, like the Saudis, who were about to do a deal with the Israelis to fully recognise them and sort of basically normalise relations, do you think actually a lot of those other states like Egypt and others actually they would just like, frankly, a bit of a quieter life, and the last thing they want is what Hamas has done? Do you think that there is a strong move by certainly the leadership, if not many of the public in the Middle East, for this to all be calmed down?
I think this is where American and British leadership are so important. And that's why the pressure on Netanyahu to not let this turn into a slaughter is also very important. Leaders of Arab countries who do want a peaceful solution, as you described, but yet they also have hundreds of thousands of their own people that are very angry right now. So for them to be able to kind of keep a lid on things, they've got to see President Biden and your prime minister putting enormous pressure on the Israeli government not to let this get out of hand. Of course, the one who benefits the most from this entire situation is the Kremlin. Nobody talks about Ukraine anymore. It's been blown off the headlines, off the news. So the Russians are benefiting the most. And of course, Russia's number one ally is not China, it's Iran. And that's why I think these things are connected. This is a
do you think the timing is significant?
Yes, because Ukraine has regained the initiative. The Black Sea Fleet is having to reposition away from Crimea. Russia is losing over 1,000 soldiers killed every day. And so the timing of this, it may not have been nailed down to the specific day or week, but this comes at a time that helps distract attention and support away from Ukraine. That's why I thought what my president said last night was so important, linking these things together so that all of us in the West can be organized and get into a posture that helps ensure Israel can defeat Hamas and that Ukraine can defeat Russia. And
just finally, briefly, if you would, Ben Hodges, how concerned are you by the sort of chaos going on in Congress in terms of no Speaker of the House of Representatives, the concerns about Joe Biden, the US president, as the next presidential candidate for Democrats, and his age? I mean, amazingly, he managed to do a trip to Israel without falling down at any point. This is quite unusual for the aging president now. Possibility of Donald Trump winning very likely the Republican nomination. He said, the Ukraine war, he could end that tomorrow. Basically, he would stop arming Ukraine. There are a lot of things riding on what happens with this next American presidential election.
Yes, well, first things first, the fact that the Republicans have not yet chosen a speaker cannot settle on a candidate that all of them can agree means we don't have a Speaker of the House, which means that the House of Representatives is not able to do the business that is needed. I imagine this will come to a head soon because all of them recognize that this is a terrible time for this kind of chaos inside our own Congress. As far as the presidential election, look, that's 13 months away. That is a lifetime. There's so much that's going to happen between now and then. I think that President Biden deserves enormous credit. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a spokesman for them, but I think the president deserves enormous credit, number one, for helping to keep more than 50 nations in support of Ukraine, and then to make the trip he just made. Of course, he didn't fall down. This guy, he's in much better health than his most likely opponent.
Oh, interesting point to make. Ben Hodges, such a pleasure to talk to you. He's Lieutenant, because American, Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, former commander of the US Army in Europe. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise.